Okay, so I have to admit that sometimes I feel like I am in an episode of The Twilight Zone, and I tend to start feeling that way when I tune into the mainstream media. That's why I don't do that typically. Typically avoid the mainstream media. At uh, I was at a friend's house, and there was a group of us guys. All of us are probably around the same age, um, standing around a campfire and talking about the election or I don't know if you call it an election. There's nobody elected. This whatever we're calling this process, and it was an oasis of clarity because here's human beings standing there, and we all saw reality for what it was. But if you turn your TV on, they're pitching you this different form of reality. So that's the Twilight Zone aspect that, I'm sort of speaking about. How easy is it for us to get caught up in this alternate reality? I mean, I feel like people live their lives programmed by this alternate reality to the point where it actually affects our reality. Um, and I want to talk about the election as and the coverage of it and everything as a springboard for this idea of what it means that we have a view, a perspective of reality that is shaped by external forces. And and that's what I mean. It's almost like this Twilight Zone idea is you see reality for what it is, but everybody else all of a sudden is talking about things you thought we knew, you thought was certain, and one day everybody's just talking about it in strange ways. And so it sort of it sort of exemplifies the polarization that we have in our nation. Um, I would say that the media is causing this to a greatest extent. If you think about it in terms of, you and it comes from our TV primarily. Obviously our phones and computers as well, but think about the idea, the concept of what we even call TV programming, right? It is programming. It's programming us. That's what it's doing. It's programming us. And so that's kind of like what I want to, I think, speak about. It used to be that polarization, um, partisanship, it seemed to me that we agreed on a problem but disagreed on the solution. We're so polarized now that we don't even we can't even agree that there's an actual problem, right? That's one of the things that is strange. So as an example, guys at this standing around a campfire, everybody looked at this election and goes, fraud. I mean, it's just absolute fraud. It's easy to see. Um, there's some people I know that they can't see it. They go, I'm not sure. I don't see the fraud. And it's just interesting to me. And if you turn on your TV, they will present the idea that the whole nation doesn't see the fraud. Like you're crazy for thinking that there's fraud. Um, and that to me is an interesting phenomenon. It's an interesting phenomenon. As someone who so in people who know me personally know I am a Christian, and I'm sort of right now in this weird situation where I'm sort of a little bit of a laughing stock to some of my close friends because I came out and explained to them this, and I've done this on videos too recently on the YouTube videos, that I'm paying attention to Christian prophets who are saying that Trump is going to get reelected. And so you see how that sort of plays into this idea of the reality with which we live. Because if you allow yourself to be programmed by the media, they will explain to you that it's a foregone conclusion that Joe Biden won. And not only did Joe Biden win, there's no fraud. There's not even evidence of fraud. And which is interesting because evidence is, I'm trying to think of an adjective that makes sense, but mountainous, I mean, voluminous, amazingly terrific. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It's huge, the amount of evidence that is, thousands of affidavits from citizens who see the fraud, the just the statistical concept. And I don't think I'm going to dive too much into the evidence of it, because I think that can get monotonous. And if people don't see it, I don't know how to help them really with that, apart from saying get whatever media sources you are consuming, stop, because they are feeding you terrible disinformation and propaganda. That would be my best advice. But so the where are we as far as like me as a Christian, uh even in the church there's this struggle where there's people who think there is no such thing as prophetic words anymore. um and there's this idea that why would God um even do anything in regards to the election and this sort of things. I think I want to talk a bit about that. But first I want to talk about what it means to this idea about a prophet. I think we have a misunderstanding about prophet. I think even I do. But I was thinking about false prophet, right? If somebody says something will happen and it doesn't happen, we just go, well, they're a false prophet. I don't think that's exactly right. It could be, but I don't think it's exactly right. The reason why I say that is if you go and you read your Bible, what you'll discover is that false prophets have a negative motivation. They are opposite God's motive, opposite God's intentions. They are saying things that God didn't tell them to say. But why are they motivated to do that? I think what you'll find is in every case, a true prophet would say things that often would be against the authorities of the day. When you read the Psalms, when you read God speaking through the prophets, a great deal of God's emphasis and focus is on justice. He's focused on the idea that those who have the power and responsibility over others are misusing it. They're greedy and they're doing things to abuse the poor. That's what God's focus is. And he's condemning them for this. So the true prophet stands up and condemns the establishment. Okay? In our day, the prophet can be a lot of different people, even people who don't claim to be religious. I would argue the media is the false prophet that we are dealing with right now. They are on the side of the establishment. Remember, we lose this idea. We think that, well, everybody's, false prophet, true prophet are two religious forces fighting each other. No, this is a spiritual battle. And we don't live in a society where kings justified their power by saying God appointed me anymore. We don't do that. So we're still dealing with the same battle. So the prophets that promote the establishment no longer come in a religious cloak. They come as what we have today, which is the media. So it's not to say false prophet and true prophet are between two religious personalities. It's the fair thing, the most reasonable thing to say is that we have two messages, two narratives, and we have to choose what we're going to believe. We have to choose who's actually telling us the truth. I mean, maybe you're not motivated to push one direction or the other. I think we probably all are biased one direction or the other, but I think that for us, we have to step back and just ask who is telling us the truth. Who's giving us the evidence, right? So this is where we get into the election. Like I said, the evidence is overwhelming. When you stop counting in the swing states, in cities that are democratically run organizationally, so, and they come up, every one of them comes up with votes, that is a problem. When thousands of people attest to the fraud, when there's video evidence of the fraud, that is evidence, okay? And the media says that that doesn't exist. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to avoid being negative about somebody who believes that, because it's amazing that all the evidence is there, and the media holds such power over people that they just parrot what the media tells them to say. There's no evidence. There's no evidence. I mean, I'm sure that's a movie somewhere. It's just, that seems very familiar to me. This idea that they're just programmed. Again, we're in this concept of programming, right? We are being programmed. There's plenty of evidence. So, in regards to false prophet, true prophet, it's about false and true. Forget prophet. Take prophet out of the way and just put information. True information, false information. The same media that pretends that evidence doesn't exist for fraud, in this case, when it's overwhelming, bashed us over the head constantly with this concept of Russian collusion. And there was no evidence for it. None. There was no evidence for it. And they had found enough of something to create an ongoing media narrative for literally years. And they can't find evidence that is put right in front of them, that's presented by the people. Joe Biden's son Hunter and his laptop. You have a specific person who runs a computer repair place in Delaware who hands a laptop that has all Hunter Biden's information on it. You have a previous associate in the same business dealing testify as well, and the media doesn't cover it because they say it's Russia conspiracy, Russian disinformation, Russian propaganda. You see all the evidence on one side, right? All the evidence is on one side. All they had to do was to justify not covering actual story, not doing journalistic work, was to come up with a conspiracy theory that Russians were involved somehow, some way. They don't even have to explain their conspiracy theory. They don't even have to give details. They can just come up with a conspiracy theory, and people then move on to the next story, whatever the media is programming them onto next. So there's a battle between what we are wanting to find out and what they're willing to tell us. To me, it's very clear. And so in regards to this concept of the election, you know, this is a nice way to sort of check yourself. I mean, if you're of the mindset that I don't know if there's evidence, and you hear people say that, just parroting something that's completely false. There's tons of evidence, and yet they go, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't see it. It's like, that's a sign of programming. That's a sign of programming. And maybe it's me that's programmed. I mean, obviously that's a possibility. The problem is, and this is kind of where I'm wanting to get. And that's why I talked about the evidence, because isn't that the way of understanding? I mean, if you're out somewhere and you're trying to figure out where you're going, don't you look at landmarkers like, oh, there's that thing on the corner there, or there's yeah, we were told that was going to be there, and that means, you know, we got a little ways, you know, there's always landmarkers. You triangulate. I mean, I'm talking old school sailing, you know, triangulate via the sun setting and rising and the stars. I mean, you use points of fact around you to figure out where you are. It can't just be within your own opinion. And so when you have two opposing views, in this case, the election, was it stolen? Was it not stolen? Is there evidence of theft, of election fraud, or is there not evidence? You go to the information, right? In other words, you can't just say there's no evidence, and then as a person who says you're for being unbiased and not being fooled and not being tricked, you can't just say, I was told there is no evidence. You have to go, okay, what's the evidence, right? What is this evidence people are talking about? And then go figure it out. So, I mean, I think when it comes to this idea of figuring out who's right and who's wrong, when it comes to any situation, and that I'm focusing on the election, but this works for everything that we're dealing with nowadays, because we're in this inundation of information. I mean, we are absolutely blasted with information in ways I don't think we've ever, as a human race, been subject to. So, how do we deal with that, right? The truth is out there, to borrow the X-Files motto. What we're dealing with, though, is we have to parse the truth from the disinformation. As an example, let me boil it down to certain couple pop culture things, right? True and false is one thing, but good and evil is also another. Everyone wants to think they're good. Everyone wants to think they're on the side of good, right? People who promote Joe Biden think he fairly won the election, and it'd be bad if Trump stole it from him. I mean, that's what we're going to hear when it gets, because I think it's going to get reversed. So who's right and who's wrong? Who's good and who's evil in this situation? Remember in Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos thought in his mind he was the good guy. Almost everybody, well, I assume let's just say everybody who watched the movie knew Thanos was the bad guy. because he was the one killing people. Again, it's the points of fact that are important. It's not the perspective with which you're seeing the situation. Thanos was the bad guy. And it was because of the deeds that he was doing. If the evidence says Joe Biden stole the election and that gets reversed, then a good thing has happened. Justice has prevailed. It isn't injustice, it's justice, right? And that's how you know. And so as a Biden supporter, that should have been a clue that you're on the wrong side, right? Oftentimes the left characterizes itself as the little guy, right? This is what they do. They're the little guy. They're for the poor. They're for the they're for the minority. I mean, all the stuff that they say. Well, someone's lying, right? I say it's them. Okay? Here's why. And here's how you can tell. Okay? And I'll give you another pop culture way to reference it. Remember that in Star Wars, the rebels were the ones, or how do you know you're on the rebel side or the Empire side? Who owns the communication system? Who owns the infrastructure? Who runs the galaxy? Imagine Star Wars and Darth Vader thought he was the rebels. The Emperor said he was the rebels. I mean, right. I mean, it doesn't work that way. We're watching and rooting for the rebels because everything's against them. So in this right-left paradigm, which it's really not right-left, it's really the little guy versus the establishment. But understand that when it comes to the agenda, the platform, the narrative that's pushed, the leftist socialist agenda is what is being pushed by the establishment, by the governmental systems, by the tech companies, by the media companies. Folks, they're not the rebels, okay? They're not the rebels, they're the empire. And that's the thing that I think people need to understand. So they're the false prophets. They're Thanos. Joe Biden stole the election. The evidence is overwhelming. And if you can't see that, it's because the empire, the establishment, is feeding you disinformation and keeping you from seeing the truth. So I'll leave it right there. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say in regards to the perspective. I wanted to focus in on the perspective and how you can judge whether your perspective is off. So let me know what you think. If you appreciated the video, like and share and comment. Tell me what, let me comment on the thing and let me know. Appreciate it.